Assalamu alaikum. So it's my extreme honor to actually introduce Imam Abdul Qadir Al Amin. He's been working in San Francisco Bay Area for years. And when Sheikh Rami was talking about the Islam and the incarceration and potential, it definitely, if anybody knows his history, he was incarcerated when he was a young man, a teenager, and he was actually put on death row in San Quentin, which is in scenic Marin County. Actually, that's actually a very expensive plot of land. So he actually was living over there. I guess he would be living large, except for the part that he was in prison. So everybody who was ever incarcerated in San Quentin, he was actually like in the high rent district, because you know everybody can't afford to be there. But actually, personally, for myself, my dad used to live in San Francisco, and so when I would go visit him as a young man and go to the masjid, the first masjid that I actually went to Juma at was actually Imam Abdul Qadir's masjid, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, for me personally, that was like my first Islamic experience, because other than that, you know, I knew that I didn't eat pork and stuff. But so, without further ado, we would like to welcome Imam Abdul Qadir to the stand, inshallah.
Thank you, Brother Sundiata. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. I seek refuge with God against Satan, the rejected. With God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. Praise is for God, the guardian, evolver, sustainer, and cherisher of all the worlds. You know, they made a mistake when they invited me. They didn't tell me what to prepare for. That's a joke. Just to give some context to what I want to talk about briefly, I'm so enlightened by the individuals who presented before me. I especially appreciate Rami's presentation and the brother who talked about iconography, image of Malcolm. When I was walking here, coming through the courtyard, I was walking through, and I had this little book in my hand, and a guy by the name of Roy, he asked me, was I carrying a Bible? I said, no, this is not a Bible, this is a notebook. I said, but I have something in my inside coat pocket that's kin to the Bible. And he said, what's that? I said, it's a Quran. He said, oh. He said, are you a Christian? I said, no, I'm a Muslim. He said, well, you don't look like a Muslim. I said, well, what do Muslims look like? He said, well, you're not dressed like a Muslim, and you don't look like a Muslim. I said, well, if you do a close examination, you'll find out that Muslims look like humans. I said, and I happen to be in that imagery. I said, and I've dressed the way I dress because I am a Muslim from this cultural environment, so I dress according to the customs of the people that I grew up among. I said, and you'll find that Muslims dress according to the customs of their society wherever you find them. And the rule is modesty. I talked a little bit about piety, and he said he was going to come here and listen to the speech, but I think he left. So anyway, again, I want to talk about time and context in relationship to our dear respected brother Malcolm X, Malcolm Little, Malcolm X, El Hajj Malik Shabazz. And, you know, he was born in May 1925. So that in context of when my mother and father were born, my mother and father were born in June 1925. So Malcolm was old enough to be my father. And he grew up in the Midwest in Nebraska. I grew up in the Midwest in Illinois. So some of the values of the people from those particular areas were traditional values about honesty and decency and cleanliness and respect for your parents, and all of those values I'm sure, resonated with Malcolm when he learned about Islam at a later time in his life. But some of the things that happened to form Malcolm's character, Malcolm's disposition, and Malcolm's spirit were tragic events that occurred in his life. At an early age, he had to be confronted with tragic circumstances that helped form that kind of personality that we saw, that we fell in love with. The courage and the determination and the strength that he spoke with, it was formed because he faced a whole lot of tragedy. And despite the tragic circumstances that he encountered early in his life, you know about his home being firebombed, you know about his father being murdered and thrown on the railroad tracks. All of those were tragic events that affected him in a way that caused him to go through some changes. No way in the world you can have those kind of experiences and not go through changes. When you experience traumatic, emotional experiences, it does something to you on the inside. You know, a lot of what we know about Malcolm is the outside. That wonderful smile was one of the features that he had that drew people to him. He was always a person who was warm, and I got this from people who work with Malcolm. You know, a lot of hadith we have from different sources, a lot of reports. When I say hadith, I'm talking about a report. A lot of reports we have about Malcolm are from sources that we don't necessarily want to trust. But some of us, if we have the time, we should get to know people who knew Malcolm. I had the good fortune of meeting with people and being in the company of individuals who actually studied with Malcolm. One of my good friends, one of our senior imams, Abdul Qadir Al Amin, he grew up in the Moorish science temples of Islam. At 12 years old, his mother accepted the Moorish science temples of Islam, and then at about 17 years old, I believe he said he heard Malcolm. And he was convinced then that he was going to go in the direction that Malcolm was calling him to go to. So he, as a young man, used to travel from Connecticut to New York. They used to drive there twice a week to study with Malcolm, where Malcolm was training individuals on how to organize in their communities, how to attract people to the movement of trying to fight against the racial injustice that was prevailing at the time. So above all, Malcolm was an individual who was committed to organizing people around the principles of justice and fairness for his people, for his community. And he was committed to that. So we think about these things, and they're worth reflecting over. But also I want you to understand, at 20 years old, Malcolm went to prison. Where were you at 20 years old? What condition were you in at 20 years old? You didn't know much at 20. You might have thought you knew a lot. But you know, if you'll be honest with yourself, you didn't know much at 20 years old. And he was introduced to some ideas about Islam from his family while he was in that circumstance, doing time in prison. And he saw it as a way to better himself. So he latched onto it. He was a voracious reader. You already know that. He had an appetite for knowledge. He was questioning what was going on in the world. He was questioning why we were in the condition that we're in. And he was looking for tools that he could grasp to bring about change in his community. And I believe that he was motivated by love for his people. I believe that the service and the sacrifice and the loyalty that he showed was because he was a loyal person. That was a value that he cherished, and that was a value that he expressed. And many times, many of you probably have had experiences with people that you were loyal to, and then they failed you. Sometimes it's very personal. Sometimes it happens in relationships. I'm talking about marriage. Sometimes it happens on jobs. Sometimes it happens in the community. That's a part of our growth and our development. So this struggle that Malcolm was involved in was a struggle to uplift us as a community. And he gave his all in doing that. And we appreciate the contributions that he made to our growth and development, because he made a contribution. He made a contribution to our growth and development in a way that it got the attention of the world. I had the good fortune of being present here at UC Berkeley when Betty Shabazz spoke here. And someone during the question and answer period told her that she shouldn't refer to Malcolm as Malcolm. Somebody told her that. And she said, she walked away from the lectern, and she said, Malcolm was my husband. And she put her hands on her hips, and she started swaying a little bit. She's saying, if I want to call him baby, it's all right, because that was my husband. And you don't, obviously, she said, you don't know who you're talking to. She said, I'm El Hajj Bahija Betty Shabazz. And I think that person disappeared. So many times we want to use Malcolm to say Malcolm is what he is for us. But he belonged to that family. He belongs to us too, but in a different way. So a lot of people have a lot of perspectives on how you see somebody and what you know about him, and you share it. Like he talked about me living in Marin County, and I was living large. And when I went over there, that was my nickname. My street name was Large. And because I was a young, wild, 19-year-old angry person, I ended up on death row. And I remember being visited by my father while I was on death row. And he told me, he said, because I joined the Nation of Islam while I was in that situation. And I was talking to my father about it, and he said, well, son, I think you'd be better off going the direction that Malcolm went in. I was 20 years old. I told my father, Malcolm was political. He was political. I said, I need to learn how to pray. I need to learn how to do some other kind of things, and I need to work on me. I said, I think I can do better going this way. And later on, I saw that my father was wiser than me. I didn't see it then. I saw it later. So many times as we're growing and evolving as human beings, the limit of our vision is based on sometimes experience. Our vision and the way we see things and the way we think is environmental. And as we grow as human beings, we hopefully, our sight spiritually and intellectually is not like the sight of our eyes. You know, our eyes as we get older, they get weaker. And if we've been in bad conditions and circumstances, we can damage them, like Malcolm did reading under dim light. But as we get older, we should see better. And as we see better, we should be making better decisions about how we interact with one another. We should be working to do what Malcolm did. He was trying to bring people together to work on those issues around social justice that affected the poor and people who were being oppressed and people who were being victimized by governments and forces that didn't value the common human person. That's what he was working towards. And he was trying to get people to work together and to come together to address those issues. Unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to see those organizations come into fruition. But he was calling toward that. So I would think that the best thing that we could do to honor the work and the legacy that Malcolm was involved with would be to pick up those issues and work together, form coalitions, form unions where we can collaborate with one another to bring about improvements in the world. He wasn't operating just on a small scale. He was operating on a big scale. He wasn't just operating in Harlem. He was concerned about what was going on in Los Angeles. He was concerned about what was going on in San Francisco. He was concerned about what was going on in Africa, Asia, and the rest of the world. And what had given him that capacity, he accepted his God-given role as a human being. And he believed in himself. He believed in himself. He believed in Allah, but he also believed in his own potential, his own ability, his own capabilities. And we need to have people who think like that today. So we are very fortunate to be here this afternoon, reflecting over the contributions of this great individual. In 1952, when he was released from prison, he was only 27 years old. Serious-minded, wasn't about foolishness. He wasn't about partying. He wasn't about getting high. He wasn't about doing criminal behavior. He was about building community. That's what he committed his life to. 12 years of his life, he crossed the width and breadth of these United States, helping to build what he thought was community within the construction of the Nation of Islam, but it was about helping people. That was just a tool that he was using. And when you find a better tool, a better way, a better method, intelligent people accept to make changes in their life. And so we honor Malcolm for his courage, his love for us, and his willingness to, even in the face of death, stand up for his people. You know, a lot of people can talk that talk. They talk that revolutionary talk, ain't gonna bust a grape. Ain't gonna kill nothing, ain't gonna let nothing die. I'm telling you the truth. There's so many fake so-called revolutionaries. They don't want to see me. Because I'm real, I'm not no phony. Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. And we'll halal an animal. You know, Rami talked about learning how to deal with animals. You know, the shepherd, he know how to raise an animal. He also know how to halal an animal. Yeah. And sometimes things can get so out of hand, it has to get to that level. Now, I'm not advocating violence. Please don't leave here saying, Imam Abdul Qadir, you know, he was talking about violence. Don't go over there to that masjid. You ain't got to, violence will visit you at your house. If we don't do something about these forces of guns and drugs and crime in our neighborhoods, violence will be right at our doorstep. If we don't stand up and start standing up for decency, start standing up for respect for families and respect for children, and begin to work against this mass incarceration, and work against the violence that's continuing to spread in our communities and neighborhoods, it doesn't matter how much Quran you recite. If you're not going to come in my neighborhood and help me to push back the forces of darkness that are threatening my wife and my children and my mother and my brothers and my sisters and my neighbors, what good is it for us to have all of this beautiful understanding if we're not going to apply it to improving our neighborhoods, improving our community, taking back our schools from these thugs? Them thugs shouldn't be a threat to us. God-fearing men should be able to come together and stop all of this madness in Oakland and Richmond and San Francisco if we'll come together and be real. I remember when we made the drug dealers leave West Oakland. I was about 32 years old, 31 years old. No, I was 30. I was 30. I'm thinking about the time now. 1980, we made the drug dealers leave West Oakland, particular neighborhood. We got the news media to come out, the cameras to come out. And one of the little drug dealers came and walked beside me and said, "You a snitch." I said, "Well, you think Nelson Mandela's a snitch? He telling on de Klerk. Is he a snitch?" I said, "I'm a freedom fighter." I said, "And you're a traitor to your people." I said, "And if I'm a snitch, do what they do to snitches." I said, "And if I get an opportunity, I'll do what they do to traitors." And he looked at me and left. I wasn't playing. I lived in the neighborhood. So yeah, I don't want my mother walking outside and you offering her some dope. So if we're not going to stand up and be real men and put our life on the line like that, we're going to be catching hell for a long time. So let's be courageous like this man. Let's be loving like this man. Let's have heart. Let's have the courage enough to accept our own reality and make the changes that are necessary so that we can make progress. I could say a lot more, but I think I've said enough. And Malcolm knew how to make salat. I just need to mention this. You know, I do research too. I'm not an academic, and I'm not a professor, but I'm an intelligent person. Malcolm learned how to make salat while he was still in prison. One of the brothers from the Boston community brought him the prayers. He said he learned them in transliteration. And then he came into an environment where that wasn't the most active part of the movement, and he left it alone. And you can get around people and you'll start doing what they're doing and maybe forget about what's most important for you in your growth and development. So be careful. Birds of a feather flock together. Assalamu alaikum. Yes, thank you, Sundiata. Sundiata asked me to inform everyone on May the 6th, we're having a meeting of clergy in East Oakland, imams and other leaders, some of whom are Christians and Jews, and we're going to be working on addressing mass incarceration, gun violence, and economic disparities in this area. We're expecting 100 people going to be there. It's going to be at Masjid al-Warathin at 1702 47th Avenue in East Oakland, 11 o'clock, 11 to 2. We're asking your leaders, those of you who are leaders, to be present. Being a leader doesn't mean that you're necessarily carrying the title of Imam, because the Prophet said, Kulukum Rayan, all of you are leaders, and that you will be questioned about your sphere of responsibility in that particular area. So please join us on May the 6th, 11 o'clock at Masjid Warathin for a meeting where we're going to be training on how to organize people in our community so that we can resist some of these influences that are devastating our families and our neighborhoods. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Imam Abdul Qadir's masjid, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, for me personally, that was like my first Islamic experience. Because other than that, you know, I knew that I didn't eat pork and stuff. But so, without further ado, we would like to welcome Imam Abdul Qadir to the stand, inshallah.
Thank you, Brother Sundiata. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. I see briefly. I'm so enlightened by the individuals who presented before me. I especially appreciate Rami's presentation and the brother who talked about iconography, image of Malcolm. When I was walking here, coming through the courtyard, I was walking through, and I had this little book in my hand, and a guy by the name of Roy, he asked me, was I carrying a Bible? I said, no, this is not a Bible, this is a notebook. I said, but I have something in my inside.
Assalamu alaikum. So it's my extreme honor to actually introduce Imam Abdul Qadir Al Amin. He's been working in San Francisco Bay Area for years. And when Sheikh Rami was talking about the Islam and the incarceration and potential, it definitely, if anybody knows his history, he was incarcerated when he was a young man, a teenager, and he was actually put on death row in San Quentin, which is in scenic Marin County. Actually, that's actually a very expensive plot of land. So he actually was living over there. I guess he would be living large, except for the part that he was in prison. So everybody who was ever incarcerated in San Quentin, he was actually like in the high rent district, because you know everybody can't afford to be there. But actually, personally, for myself, my dad used to live in San Francisco, and so when I would go visit him as a young man and go to the masjid, the first masjid that I actually went to Juma at was actually
Seek refuge with God against Satan, the rejected, with God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. Praise is for God, the guardian, evolver, sustainer, and cherisher of all the worlds. You know, they made a mistake when they invited me. They didn't tell me what to prepare for. That's a joke. Just to give some context to what I want to talk about.